Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So in addition to New York funeral directors today, we also have invited our partnership states of Massachusetts, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Connecticut. So welcome to everyone. I'm going to do a few housekeeping items, and some of these only apply to the New York funeral directors. So if you're not a New York funeral director, don't panic that you have no idea what I'm saying. If anyone gets disconnected during this webinar, please go right back into the link and get on again. And if you have any problems getting on again, please contact us via email or telephone, and we will do our best to assist you. This is more for the New Yorkers. If you're using the GoToWebinar app on your phone, specifically the iPhone, sometimes the reporting doesn't come out exactly the way it should. So for this instance, and actually for all New Yorkers, please notice the red number that is on your screen right now. That is a number you may need to give me, as well as the number we provide at the end of this webinar as a proof of attendance. So write that number down right now, but specifically if you're using your iPhone. At the time of registration, you were asked to provide all the names of those sitting in on the webinar with you. If for some reason you did not provide someone's name or they showed up late and you just realized they're there, please reach out to us via email, give us their name so we can get them on the list. And in order to receive credit for New York State, you must have pre-registered for this. All other states, you will be contacted by your state with your CEU credit. Following the webinar, we're asking the New York State funeral directors to give us about 7 days to reflect, and I say business days, to reflect on your portal the credit. And if you have questions during this webinar, we welcome them. On the right-hand side of your screen in that panel, you will see a question box. Please type your questions in there and we will answer them towards the end of the program. All right, at this time, I'd like to welcome the New York State Executive Director, Mike Lunati, who will be our presenter today. And we thank you. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Kelly. Welcome everybody to the Northeast Funeral Service Partnerships webinar on funeral service data and trends, the 2025 edition. Before we get going, I just wanted to let you know that as we work our way through this presentation, we will be drawing some inferences and posing some questions. As you'll see, we have plenty of empirical data that we can use to prompt questions about the current and future status of funeral service. Admittedly, we don't have all the answers, but I would actually argue that that makes being aware of the possibilities and preparing for some of these eventualities, therefore, even more important. All right, it's not going to go for me. All right, I'll do it the old-fashioned way. So a little background about the partnership. The partnership was born out of concerns with the lack of national level support for the AAMI conference licensing issue. We first met in October of 2018 and quickly realized the untapped power and potential we had through advanced collaboration. Since 2018, we have held regular meetings and worked on several initiatives. Actually, our first project was the 5-state member survey, which we did in 2019, again in 2020, and then obviously earlier this year. Also in 2024, we launched the first of its kind funeral home employer certification program, which was so successful we plan to host it again, along with an employee certification program, which is currently being constructed. As you can see, we have the names of my colleagues here. So my friends and colleagues from the other partnership states will be adding their thoughts as we work our way through the slides, but for better or worse, I will be your MC. Before we jump into the data, here is the profile of the survey respondents, so you have a sense of who replied as we work our way through the survey results. This year's respondents actually had the same profile as our 2020 group. Actually, in terms of numbers, we had a total of 445 responses, which is comparable to 2020 when we had 456. So when we compare our 2020 results to this year's survey, we know we're referring to a similar pool of respondents in terms of size and background. So first, we're going to take a look at some funeral service numerical data. As we go through this section, please note that our approach is to show trends in the industry over a period of time. In some cases, it'll be a snapshot of 2 points in time. In other cases, it'll be by showing some annual changes. First place that we're going to take a look is at the number of funeral homes. This slide actually shows the number of funeral homes in 2020, which I just mentioned is the last time we did our survey, compared to the current survey that we did earlier this year. The partnership states have seen the number of funeral homes decrease by 533 over the past 5 years, and this represents an 11% decrease. Nationally, the number of funeral homes decreased by 262, or 1.4%. So even though we had a larger decrease, and even with this decrease, the partnership states still represent 22.5% of funeral homes nationwide. So almost a quarter of all funeral homes nationwide are located within the 5 partnership states. Just a couple of notes on these statistics. For New Jersey, this number represents active funeral businesses in New Jersey, so that may not equate exactly to the number of funeral homes. And for Connecticut, this number represents active funeral home licenses, not rooftops. When you look at the funeral firm profile itself, our survey respondents reported that 93% of them are from independently owned firms. This is actually up from 85% in 2020. Nationally, NFDA's most recent survey reported 76% of their member firms are independently owned. So we are higher than the national average in terms of funeral homes that are owned by or owned independently. In terms of number of locations, which is the information on the right-hand side of the slide, the majority of respondents operate one firm, specifically 60% of them. These responses actually are all very substantially similar to 2020 with one exception. The percent of respondents operating 5 or more locations has tripled to 6%, up from 2% in 2020. And the corresponding decrease is found in firms that operate 3 locations, which is down from 10% in 2020. So we're going to look at annual call volume. You'll note here that the tiers between the national partnership states don't match up. However, you can make some conclusions by grouping tiers together. So if you group certain tiers together on the I'll call it the top half of the slide, you can see that 83% of NFDA member firms handle 350 or less calls per year, while 85% of partnership states handle 399 or less. However, I'd actually argue that based on this data, the partnership firms on average are handling higher call volumes than the firms do nationally. This is actually supported by the fact that according to NFDA, the average NFDA member firm handles 113 calls per year. And in our survey, our members reported needing 133 calls per year to break even. So that basically means they would need to be doing more calls than the national average just to keep the lights on. Also, based on the survey results, about 1/3 of partnership member firms fall below that break-even number of 133. This actually may partially explain the slide that showed the decreasing number of funeral homes over the past decade. Why? Because if you're not making enough money to cover expenses, it's going to be nearly impossible to maintain operations. Next, we're going to take a look at the actual number of funeral directors. This is from the most recent slide. So you'll see that the U.S. Department of Labor shows that there are 25,300 funeral directors. In 2020, the Department of Labor reported that there were 25,740 funeral directors. So that's a decrease over 5 years of only 400 funeral directors nationwide. The partnership respondents reported a total of 9,637 funeral directors, and that winds up being a decrease of 1,238 or 11% compared to 2020, when our respondents reported 10,875 funeral directors across the 5 states. One quick note for New Jersey, this number represents the number of renewed licenses in 2025. So a couple things. One that's significant to note is that even with this decrease, obviously, again, much higher decrease percentage than nationwide, the partnership states still represent 38% of the nation's funeral directors. So those are 5 states have 22.5% of the funeral homes nationwide and 38% of the funeral directors nationwide, a very strong percentage in both places. And also, while not included in the slide, we know that the number of funeral directors follows the same downward trend as the number of funeral homes, as we just looked at. Coincidentally, both the number of firms and funeral directors in the partnership states decreased by that exact same 11% percentage. Next, we're going to look at some other statistics about the funeral directors themselves. This question basically just asks our respondents what their age is. So as you can see here, based on this pie chart, 40% of our funeral directors are 60 or older, 70% are 50 or older. The partnership states basically have an older workforce than the national average, which you can see there is 48.6%. So this kind of prompts our first question, which is, will this higher than average national age of our funeral directors create a more severe workforce challenge as our more seasoned funeral directors retire? We also asked our members about their experience, number of years licensed. So when we look at the experience, we see the data suggests a very experienced workforce in the Northeast. As you can see here, the breakdown shows that more than 2/3, 71% of the workforce have at least 21 years of experience, with almost half having at least 31 years under their belts. Again, I think this reinforces the comment from the previous slide indicating an aging workforce and the impact this could potentially have on our workforce challenges is yet to be seen. One other note on experience that is not on a slide but was a posed question is we asked folks if funeral service was their first career. 73% of our respondents have said that it is their first career. So still a very strong percentage of folks getting into funeral service as their first career. Moving from funeral directors to deaths, we're now going to turn our attention to some of those death statistics. Please note the government lags behind in publishing this data. So first, let's look at a snapshot showing the difference in the number of deaths over a few years. Nationally, there were 179,182 more deaths in 2023 compared to 2019. That equates to a 6.2% increase in 2023 compared to 2019. In comparison, there were just over 72,500 more deaths in 2021 in the partnership states compared to 2 to 4 years previous to that. And that equates to a 16.2% increase. So another place to take a pause and ask ourselves if there's any conclusions we can draw from what we've looked at so far. So if we have less funeral homes and funeral directors combined with more deaths, it's reasonable to conclude that the remaining firms should have more case volume, might be stressed by not having more or enough funeral directors to handle that. So it paints a positive picture from a revenue and business volume perspective, although it may heighten those existing workforce concerns. In addition to the actual number of deaths, we researched the death rate. As many of you probably know, industry experts have forecasted a higher death rate for several years, but we've yet to see it materialize. However, looking at the trend from 2018 to 2022, again, those current death stats are not available, we can see that the death rate is starting to increase. The figures on the chart show the number of deaths per 100,000 in the partnership states. The impact from COVID can definitely be seen in the bar graph for 20 and 21. And it is possible that the COVID deaths may have carried over to 2022. So once data for the 23, 24, 25 is available, we'll be able to see if the death rate is actually starting to increase as predicted. So with these numbers as the foundation, let's now look at some other statistics and trends that could already be impacting or have the potential to impact funeral service, starting with some household data. As further evidence that people are living longer and a factor as to why the death rate isn't increasing as predicted, when we look at census data, the death rates make even more sense. So as you can see from this slide, the census data shows us Americans 65 and older. In 2010, that was 13%. In 15, it was 15%. The 2030 projection is 20%. And if you look at that bottom half of the slide, that's a really impressive number in there showing that the estimate is that those folks over 65 is going to double over the next 3 decades from 48 to 88 million. Again, this all supports the previous statement of higher call volume for existing firms in the upcoming year. So using this as another checkpoint, we have evidence that the number of deaths are increasing, the death rates are possibly showing signs of increasing, baby boomers are moving into the older age categories, and we have a declining number of funeral homes and funeral directors. So again, it's all pointing towards this conclusion that the firms that are around over this now and into the future are probably going to have higher call volume as we move forward. But it's not just about aging baby boomers. We also need to pay attention to millennials, since they are now the largest generation in the US. If you look at that table in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the difference for the different, I guess I'll call them generations. It's listed in the millions. And as I said, you can see there, the millennials curving slowly downward now and as it goes into 2050. But if you look at just even 2028, or the line going from 19 to 28, you can see that the millennials are on the upward trend, boomers are dropping at a rather significant rate, and the Gen Xers are tailing off. So what do we know about these millennials if they're the biggest population? Well, we all know that they're the largest generation. We know they're more racially diverse, with 43% of them being non-white. We also know they're on track to be the most educated, but they're struggling with debt because of a sluggish labor market. And we know a third of them are living with their parents at home. When I talk about a sluggish labor market, what that specifically means is they're looking at a market for four-year degree holders who are working either for minimum wage in technical jobs or underemployed. So the labor market has a higher percentage of that per Pew Research data, which means that they're having a harder time finding the jobs that would be side of the ones I just mentioned. So again, we're at a spot where it prompts a few questions. So I just said they're more diverse. Will the fact that they are more diverse impact your business model? Will the fact more are living with their parents impact their buying decisions? If so, will it spill over to funeral spending? Will the growth and makeup of millennials have a direct impact on traditions when it comes to funerals? We don't have concrete answers yet, but these are things you should be aware of and start thinking about the potential impacts these could have. In addition to millennials taking up more, what else do we know about shifting household makeup? Well, we know that 20% of Americans live in a multi-generational household. 68% are living with their parents. It's the highest level since the Great Depression. And you can see here some information about how they support one another. So this one's a little complicated. I tried to break it down to the easiest way I could. But basically what this is showing is that about 2/3 of the, I'll call them parents who have at least one child 18 or older, say that they are providing financial support to help them. The other side is 33% of the children with a parent at least 65 or older said they provide financial support to their parents. And then you have 45% of adults who are that 18 to 34 age saying that they're completely financially independent from their parents. So less than half of adults aged 18 to 34 are financially independent. So what does this all say? It says nearly 2/3 of parents are financially supporting their kids. A third of kids say they provide financial support to their parents, and less than half of adults are financially independent from their parents. And the support goes beyond money. In addition to the emotional support that is taking place, as you can see from the slide, about half of both parents and adult kids report that helping each other with things like housework, errands, home repairs, personal care, and childcare. So I'm just trying to paint a picture for your client base. If this is what the households look like, then these are the folks who are going to be coming into your funeral. So can you draw any conclusion from that? Well, we know families are facing now the dual challenge of caring for aging parents while supporting adult children. So they're both trying to support each other. And this kind of begs the question, how will this impact the family dynamic? Does it make these folks closer, or does it add burdens and stresses that have the opposite effect and pull people apart? Will any impact or effect of this impact their buying decisions when it comes to funerals? At the risk of further depressing everyone, or at least making your head hurt, let's dig a little deeper. The two leftmost charts show that less people are getting married, or at least waiting longer to do so. So you can see the first one is the never married adult. That is going up, that trend. And the folks who are waiting to get married in their 40s is also going up pretty fast. The chart on the right shows that single parent households are on the rise while two parent households are declining. And then you also have the public divide over the value of marriage and whether it's valuable. So what does this all say? It all says that the traditional household is on the decline, or at least changing. Why do I think that's important? Because since I've been with the association, I hear the phrase the traditional funeral, and we often refer to a traditional funeral. So is traditional as we always refer to it changing? If so, is funeral service ready, or at least preparing to adapt to changes to a traditional household and potentially a traditional funeral? Keeping with the American household makeup, another shift that could impact funeral service is the split between classes. So this graph shows, or the slide shows, the changing wealth distribution when it comes to lower, middle, and upper income households. So on the left-hand side, that one chart shows 50% of US adults live in middle-class income households. Again, this data is a little older, but it's the most recent that Pew Research has. But you can see it's a decrease over several decades in terms of the middle class. On the other side of the graph, you can see the changing dollar values and percentages of the other classes, or all the three classes. So what's really this is showing, if you read the bottom of this graph, is that the financial gaps are widening, especially between middle and upper income. Upper income households hold 50% of the aggregate income, up from 29% in 1970. Upper income household wealth has increased 69% over the last 50 years. That's 20% higher than middle income households whose wealth only rose 49%. So what it all shows is that the upper income households have a lot of wealth. They are still less than a quarter of the population, however. It also shows that lower income households are becoming a larger percentage, and that middle income households are shrinking in terms of percentage and in the amount of wealth that they hold. It's a declining amount of wealth. So really, this all kind of epitomizes the phrase, the rich get richer while the poor get poorer. So again, we should ask ourselves, will this trend impact funeral service? Do these shifts or change the amount of disposable income available to a larger number of households? Well, let's take a look and see if we can, what's happening so far. So we'll now take a look at some consumer spending trends. This graph shows the changes in consumer prices from both an overall perspective and specifically as it relates to funeral services. So what does this say? It says that the overall cost of funerals is greatly outpacing the cost of overall consumer goods and services. So you can see there that funeral expenses is the solid gold line, burial caskets is the solid black line, and everything else are the dotted lines. So it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, this is not necessarily a good place to be. How do we know if it's bad news? By looking at where people are spending their money, which is what this chart shows. So this shows trends from 2018-19, which is the most recent data that's available. As we can see, consumers are spending more on essentials like food, home ownership, transportation, healthcare, and less on non-essentials like entertainment. Not too surprising or alarming maybe, but if you dig deeper, you'll see a couple of things. First, in 2019, the percent spent on these essentials was at a higher percentage than in 2018. Second, consumers had actually decreased spending on insurance and pensions. a signal that savings and disposable income are down. And third, and the most alarming to me, is that last bar, which shows a large decrease in spending on other expenditures from 18 to 19. It's a decrease that's pretty substantial, when in 2017 to 18, it actually increased, albeit slightly. So this slide takes what we saw in the previous about the miscellaneous and adds some more current data. This slide actually depicts the percent spent by consumers in each major spending category. For point of reference, funerals are included in the miscellaneous category, and as you can see, only 1.5% is spent on the entire category in miscellaneous, not just funerals. So again, something to consider or think about. If folks have less to spend overall, and they're spending less on non-essentials, and funeral services, and funeral expenses are increasing at a higher rate than other consumer goods, what will it mean for spending on funerals? Combine this thought with the changing households and tradition, and it's definitely worth focusing on for the industry's future. So speaking of traditions, let's look at another consumer preference that has a big impact on funeral service, and that is religion. Again, according to Pew Research, we have some data that shows that there has been an increase in adults who consider themselves unaffiliated with the religion, with millennials serving as a major driver. 35% of millennials report not being affiliated with the religion. And remember, we just noted that millennials are now the largest generation in terms of size. So this represents a large number of adults and could be an indicator of future preferences when it comes to funeral service. But it's not necessarily that what we associate with religion is going away. In fact, an increasing number of adults view themselves as spiritual as opposed to religious. To me, the most noteworthy information on this slide is the demographic information. So you can see there, it's kind of just below the middle on the left-hand side. There's 53%, 47% women in this segment. 78% are under 65, and 71% have attended some college. So this is a gender neutral, younger, educated group that feels this way. And I think that's important to keep in mind. And the question to ask yourselves is whether this is an opportunity to market services that fill this need and preference to incorporate spirituality without a specific religion. Again, this could potentially be a move away from funeral service in the traditional sense. We just think it's very important to keep asking ourselves, are there changes in consumer preferences that can and will be impacting the way you provide services to the families that come to you at their time of need? Religion is obviously one of the most powerful ones and has been one of the stronger ones and influential ones. So we wanted to make sure that we were providing information, and we have even some more information for you as it relates to religion. So further support for age impacting religion can be seen on this slide. This data actually comes from both Pew Research and a recent NFDA consumer survey. So again, when you look at this preference when it comes to age, 33% of folks 65 and older say they've grown more religious, while 24% say have become less religious. 15% under 30 say have they become more religious, and 42% less religious. So again, the younger are not necessarily following the trends of their parents and grandparents when it comes to religion. When you look down, consumers 40 and older who feel it's important to have religion as part of a funeral, you can see the shift there. It's a downward trend. 45% have attended a funeral in which a non-clergy is presided, and 36% would consider using a celebrant for their own services. Again, all information that we should all be keeping in mind as we prepare ourselves for the next group or the current group that's going to be coming in and asking for your help. So lastly, this is from our current survey. We asked you what you're seeing in your funeral homes. So you can see here from this chart, right? If you work your way from the left to the right, it is the percentages of families having religious services, with the higher percent asking for it moving over to the right side. So less than, we asked, how many of your families are requesting funeral service? Is it less than 25%? Only 2% of you said it's less than 25%. 17% of you said it's between 25 and 50%. Another 46 said it's between 50 and 75, and 35 said it's more than 75. So from our survey results of the partnership, it appears religion is still a prevalent aspect of funerals in the Northeast. Probably not too surprising for everybody, but based on the data and trends we just went through, it's worth keeping an eye on and monitoring the situation. The next consumer preference that we looked at is disposition. As predicted and expected, the cremation rate continues to rise. This is true both nationally and among the partnership states. You can see the graph shows an increase over the past 5 years nationally, where we see a 6% increase has occurred in cremation. On this slide, there's actually a troubling trend that's depicted when it comes to cremation choices being selected. Consumer education on cremation choices had been showing positive trends with more consumers choosing cremation with a viewing or a service. But respondents this year from our survey report a reversion back. So when you look at direct cremations, 23% of the survey respondents reported that greater than 25% of their business, less than 25% of their business comes from direct cremation. This is down from 38% in 2020. 41% say it's 25 to 50, 32% say it makes up 50 to 75. That is up from 19% in 2020. So in 2020, when we asked how much of your cremations are direct, 19% said it was more than half, or half to 3/4. This year, 32% said that. And only 4% say it's more than 75%. We asked about cremation with a viewing. 38% of members report that up to 25% of their business comes from cremation with a viewing. This is up from 17% in 2020. 44% say it's between 25 and 50. 14% say it makes up 50 to 75%. This is down from 25% in 2020. So that's part of that troubling trend. 3% say it is 75% or more. And that is also troubling because that is down from 8% in 2020. So a larger percentage of respondents are reporting higher direct cremation volume and less cremation with viewing volume. When it comes to cremation with service, this is a new category this year, so we don't have any comparisons. But as you can see, this option shows the same general percentages and trends as the others. We also asked you about disposal of cremains, and as the chart illustrates, nearly 1/2, it's actually 44%, report that is returned to next of kin. That is actually down from 49% in 2020. The other percentages are, for those that are buried, it was 26%, 10% say scattered, 8% say entombed, 8% reported unknown, which is up from 3% in 2020, and another 3% say it's abandoned at the funeral home. As we mentioned, when it was first introduced, cremation was a new disposition option. It was mostly dismissed by the industry as a fad, which was obviously the wrong conclusion. Many of you know about all the other forms that are out there. There are several other disposition options that are either being used or on the horizon, which you would be aware of. The one that's getting the most press right now is human composting or natural organic reduction. That continues to get a lot of press. That is something that was recently, a couple of years ago, made legal in New York. Cremation, which is freeze drying, that's that bottom left one. From what we know now, it is allowed in the United Kingdom for animals. And there is, or was at least, a company looking to bring this to the United States, and they had originally focused in the Midwestern states when they first came over. There's also the green burials, which is the middle section there. There are pet funerals, which is on the rise. And there's alkaline hydrolysis. This is a slide from several years ago. The states shaded in green on this slide do allow that, and those that are in blue was where it was under consideration. This is a couple of years old now, that slide though. All right, so now shifting to our final consumer preference, we're going to take a look at memorial services. So with many reports and member concerns regarding non-traditional players or interlopers entering funeral service space when it comes to hosting memorial services, we posed several questions about this on this year's survey. Consumer preferences about this could be tied to the changing household demographics we covered earlier. But as you can see, so far so good, at least with our respondents. Still, the overwhelming majority say that the most often venue used is the funeral home or the church, and everything else below that is under 20%. So I bet you this is probably higher than if we did ask this question in 2020. So definitely worth asking again the next time we do it and monitoring the trend. But it is not turned into something that has necessarily really made inroads into the Northeast Partnership states at a high percentage, at least based on our funeral home respondents. And what may be evidence of some adapting to change? Almost 3/4, 73%, say they would handle memorial service even if the consumer didn't use their firm for a cremation. Again, a question that we asked on the 2025 survey earlier this year. All right, so we're going to flip over now. We're going to turn our attention to several business trends, which you should be aware of, and in some cases addressing already to ensure the continued success of your business. First, we are going to look at some business issues. We had asked you as the respondents to rank several business issues by importance. This chart shows the issues that are deemed extremely important to funeral service. So the one that received the largest percentage was profitability. 83% of you said that that is an extremely important business issue. The others that are on here were all within 3 percentage points of each other. Customs and cremation came in at 59%. Education and pre-need came in at 58%. And succession came in at 56%. The emerging forms of disposition, or on the chart it says alternate disposition, came in at 23%. Interestingly, customs and cremation, as I mentioned, are 59% this year. Customs was 70% in 2020, and cremation was 69% in 2020. We had also had a second category where we, under extremely important, which was moderately important. So although I don't have it on the slide, if you combine these categories, the extremely and moderately important, then this is how they would rank. Profitability, if you combine those two, 99% of you said profitability is either extremely or moderately important. 98% of you said pre-need. 97% of you said cremation. 96% said changing customs. 96% said education, and 93% said succession. So all the top 6 ranked issues garnered at least 93% of respondents, ranking them in one of the 2 most important categories. So suffice it to say, all of these are priorities for funeral service when it comes to business issues. So I think it's important to note that when you look at these items, pre-need, cremation, changing customs, all impact profitability on the revenue side. And while you can influence and impact these issues, they're not solely in your control. Profitability can also be managed and increased through reducing expenses, which are more in your control. So in our last partnership member survey, respondents reported that their 3 biggest operational expenses outside of salaries were taxes, insurance, and building and property maintenance. So a question for everybody is, have you looked at ways to reduce those expenses? Have you challenged a tax assessment? Have you reviewed your insurance coverages and shop providers to reduce your premium expenses? Have you looked at many maintenance contracts that you're under to see if you can negotiate them to save more money? Even in equipment that you own, have you looked at it investing in energy efficient equipment to help reduce expenses? So if these are extremely important, and they're on the business side, I think it's very important for you to be looking at ways to manage your expenses to help with the profitability aspects that we know is extremely important. I mentioned pre-need jumps to 98% near the top of the list when you combine the top two categories. So let's look at pre-funded caseload at funeral homes. We'd ask, and you can see from the data here that virtually all firms report 50% or less of their annual caseload is pre-funded. So if 42% of you say less than 25% of your caseload is pre-funded, 55% of you say it's between a quarter and half, only 3% of you said it's between a half and 3/4, and less than 1% of you said it's 75% or more. And just an interesting note, these results are almost identical to the 2020 survey results when pre-need was also ranked amongst one of the highest business issues out there. So the question that jumps to mind for me is pre-need so highly ranked because firms are concerned about how much of their annual caseload is pre-funded as a percentage, or is it the details within the accounts, meaning the services and merchandise selections and overall dollar value of the accounts that is of concern when it comes to that? So we're going to take a look now at some price data to see if it helps us provide any answers to that. So the next few slides are going to compare the partnership states to the nation in cost of different types of funerals. First is what we dubbed a traditional funeral with burial. As you can see, the partnership states are almost $2,000 more expensive than the national average. Another noteworthy point is that the national average is actually down from $93.15 in 2019, while the partnership states have increased from $94.93 in 2020 to the $10,244 you see here on the slide. The next slide shows the cost for a cremation with a viewing. Partnership states again are higher than the national average. The average cost in partnership states is just over $1,000 more expensive than the national average. Nationally, this price has actually increased. It's up from $51.50 in 2019, which is about a 22% increase. Among partnership states, this price increase, it's up from $64.95 in 2020, which is a 13% increase. We also looked at cremation with service. This is, again, a new category for 2025, so we don't have comparisons. Interestingly, the partnership state firms are lower than the national average in this category. I actually tried to figure out a reason for this, but I couldn't come up with one. Just an interesting note in my mind. Nationally, the costs for both types of cremation are substantially similar: $62.80 for cremation with viewing, $68.05 for cremation with service. It's only a $525 difference. In the partnership states, the difference is just over $2,000 at $2,043. Again, I couldn't draw any conclusions for the cremation pricing methodology in the partnership states as to why they were so different, but I thought it was an interesting because of the large variation in the partnership states compared to the national averages. The next up is direct cremations. As you can see, the partnership states once again coming at a higher price. The direct cremation in the partnership states is just over $800. It's $813 higher than the national average. Nationally, prices remained virtually flat since 2019, when it was $21.95. In the partnership states, the cost has risen by $317 since 2020, when the average price was $27.61. So not much movement nationally or regionally when it comes to the cost for direct cremations. Shifting gears to some non-financial business topics. We asked once again about posting your GPL online. When we first asked this question in 2020, it was widely expected that the FTC's funeral rule was going to be revised and would almost certainly include this requirement. But things are now, I guess I'll call it uncertain, with changes in the administration. And as you can see from the slide, when we asked if you post your GPL online, 27% say yes, they do. This is up from 17% in 2020. 72% said no, and there is still 1% out there who do not have a website for their funeral home. And then you can see on the right-hand side, for those of amongst that 27% that do post it online, 2/3 of you actually have a link from your homepage to get to the GPL. Another area we asked you a question about was your succession plans. We asked if you have a succession plan. 64% of the firms across the 5 states reported they do not have a succession plan, yet this ranks as one of the most important business issues facing funeral service. This is actually up from 2020 when 58% of respondents reported not having a succession plan. Of firms that do have a plan, 64% say the plan is for internal staff to purchase their funeral home. Another 23% plan on an open market purchase, and a 5% plan on a corporate purchase, while another 5% plan for a real estate purchase. So succession planning was deemed very or moderately important by 93% of our respondents, yet 64% don't have a plan. This just doesn't jive to me. So if you happen to fall into this category of believing it's important, but you haven't yet planned for it, you may want to try to address this in your list of 2025 goals, so that it can take this one off the list. Again, if it's deemed that highly important by so many of you, it's a little surprising that nearly 2/3 don't have a plan in place. The last area in the business that we asked about for business trends was about license reciprocity. As you can see, we had a large percentage of support for these things. Respondents believe there should be reciprocity between our states to accept licenses from another state. Almost virtually everybody felt that if you've been licensed and are in good standing in your state for 5 years and you passed another state's law exam, that you should be allowed to be licensed. 3/4 feel the MBE should only be required when you're initially applying for a license, and just under 90% would support any type of legislative or regulatory effort to ensure that license reciprocity exists. I will tell you that during our most recent partnership meeting, we once again reinforced the notion that this is very important to us in the partnership states, and we are formulating our plan to try and move the needle a little bit on this, if at all possible. I'm now going to turn to the last section of the webinar, which is going to talk about personnel data and trends, and we'll begin with some data on funeral home staff. So first, looking at full-time full funeral directors, nearly 3/4 of our firms, 72%, employ between 1 and 4 full-time licensed funeral directors. This is up from 56% in 2020. It's a pretty significant increase. More specifically, 50% of you employ 2 to 4, 22% employ 1, another 14% employ 5 to 9 full-time staff, and 3% of you have 10 or more full-time funeral directors on staff. We also asked about part-time funeral directors. Less than half of our firms, 39%, employ a part-time licensed funeral director. So as you can see on the slide, 61% of you do not have any part-time funeral directors. Of the funeral homes with part-time funeral directors, 20% only have 1. Another 15% have 2 to 4. 22% employ 5 to 9, and less than 1% employ 10 or more part-timers. Lastly, looking at non-licensed staff who are full-time, nearly 3/4, again, 72%, have full-time non-licensed staff. This is up from 56% in 2020, another large increase, just like the number of full-time funeral directors. Of firms that do have non-licensed staff, 19% of you have 1 person, 36% of you have 2 to 4. Another 12% have 5 to 9, and another 5% have 10 or more. So the majority, or a third of you, have 2 to 4 staffers who are non-licensed full-time staff working at your funeral homes. We next looked at staff based on gender. As you can see, 82% of firms employ between 1 and 3 male funeral directors, while another 68% employ 1 to 3 female funeral directors. The overall percentage of firms that employ female funeral directors has increased since 2020, when it was 65%. So we've seen a 3% increase, while the percent of firms that don't employ a female funeral director has declined 2%, down from 26% in 2020 to 24% now. I don't think this change is too surprising when you consider that per the ABFSC statistics, more than 3/4 of all mortuary science students are now female. So maybe at that rate, maybe it's a little surprising that there's not more female employees, but It sounds like this is a trend that's going to continue to move in favor of more female funeral directors being hired just because of who's in school at mortuary science colleges. We're now going to go through several pie charts that show salaries based on different positions or years of service. As we go through these slides, please keep in mind the U.S. Department of Labor reported that this information is from our survey, but I'm going to give you a reference point from the U.S. Department of Labor statistics I was able to gather, which reported that a funeral director's 2023 annual mean wage in each partnership wage. All right, let me say this a different way. The most recent data from the U.S. Department of Labor is 2023 data, and they were able to give us the annual mean wage in each of the partnership states. So a funeral director's salary or wage in 2023 in each of the partnership states was in Connecticut, $73,690. In Massachusetts, $68,280. In New Jersey, $66,270. In New York, $72,970. And in Pennsylvania, $62,650. So you can see pretty close in terms of the mean. And it's important, I think, to note that this figure actually compares favorably to the national average, which in 2013 was just over $58,000. So that's just a reference point as we go through this data. So first one we're going to look at is the owner's salaries. So just under 50%, 49% of you responded that the owner earns $100,000 or more per year. It really was single. It was much lower everywhere else. It was single percentages, 7 to 8% for each of 70 to 79, 80 to 89, and 90 to 99. 5% reported 60 to 69, another 9%, 50 to 59. And then it was very small percentages, 1 to 2 to 4% for anything under $50,000. The one that was weird, but at first when I thought about it, was the up to 19,000, which was 7%. But then knowing that it's probably just reporting purposes for income tax, maybe not so surprising. The next area we looked at was years of experience for a licensed funeral director who is licensed 15 plus years. 78% of you said you employ a funeral director with 15 plus years of experience. And the salary breakdown for them is those in that category earning 100,000 or more was 19%. This was up from 9% in 2020, which is a pretty big jump, pretty impressive. 80 to 89,000 was the second highest at 14%, followed by 90 to 99,000 at 11%, and 70 to 79 at 10%. The next years of experience category was 11 to 14 years of experience. 59% of the respondents said that they have employ a funeral director with between 11 to 14 years of experience. The salaries reported from the highest percentage to the lowest here, 80 to 89,000 was 12%. That's actually up from 8% in 2020. The second highest was 70 to 79,000, which was 11%, again up from 9% in 2020. 7% said they pay 50 to 59, which is the same from before. And 6% said they pay 90 to 99 or over 100,000. The 90 to 99 is up from 4% in 2020. And the most impressive one for me was 100,000 and up, as I just mentioned, was 6% from this most recent survey. It was only 1% in 2020. So that's a 5% increase in that category. Looking at those licensed 6 to 10, 58% of you have a funeral director that has between 6 and 10 years of experience. These highest to lowest salaries, 60 to 69,000 and 70 to 79,000 were both at 11%. 70 to 79,000 is up from 7% in 2020. So that's another 5% increase. The second highest was 0 to 19,000 at 9%. 50 to 59,000 was 7%, and 80 to 89,000 was 6%, which doubled. It was up from 3% in 2020. The only other ones in there, 20 to 29,000 was 3%, 70 to 79,000 was 2%. I guess the one that made me chuckle, the up to 19,000 category, that one had no responses in 2020, and it's now the second highest salary range offered at 9%. So I'm not really sure what happened there, but that's clearly, if looking at it just empirically based on the data we have, that's not obviously something that's going to help you retain staff very well, most likely. The last category, we have two more categories, 2 to 5 years. 57% of you employ a funeral director with this level of experience. These are all very consistent with 2020 results. The highest percentage for salaries was 12%, giving 50 to 59,000, followed by 60 to 69,000 at 10%, 70 to 79,000 at 9%, and 40 to 49,000 at 7%. The other ones were very small, everything under 2%. If you have less than 2 years experience, just about half of you have folks with less than 2 years experience. The 50 to 59,000 was the highest paid salary at 12%, followed by 40 to 49 at 10%. Again, 0 to 19,000 was 9%, the third highest, and 60 to 69 was 8%. All the remaining categories were between 1 to 2%. These are all very consistent with the 2020 results. We also asked you guys about your residents / interns / apprentices, depending on what state you are, you use a different phrase. These are also very similar to 2020 reported salaries for this category, with a few exceptions. Of the up to 15,000 was not asked in 2020. So you can see there, that's 10%. The other percentages are pretty close. It was 15 to 19 was 8% in 2020. 20 to 29 was 14% in 2020. 30 to 39 was 16%. 40 to 49 was 8%, and 50,000 was 2% back in 2020. And you can see the changes on the chart here. In 2020, 73% of you had hosted a resident or intern, and 79% were willing to hire one. You can see here, pretty consistent. Just a few less of you had hosted interns during this time when we asked you. But other than that, pretty similar to 2020 results. Once again, like we did in 2020, we asked about job readiness. Unfortunately, this is trending in the wrong direction. In 2020, 30% of you said the candidate was well prepared, now only 23%. The same number said somewhat prepared, 54% in 2020 and again. And the candidate was not at all prepared. 16% of you said that was the case in 2020, where 23% of you said that is the case now. And in addition, between 63 and 69% of survey respondents agree that the residency intern experience should be improved. There should be legislative and/or regulatory efforts for improvement, that a curriculum should be developed for funeral directors charged with training residents or interns, and the licensee training or mentoring the resident intern should be trained or certified in that task. We next asked about benefits. This chart shows the benefits offered and the percent of firms that offer them. So a few observations. The top 3 offered benefits are paid continuing education, paying for licensing fees, and paid time off. State association membership was the only other benefit at least 70% of respondents offer. The only other benefits that a majority, at least 50% of the respondents offer, are health insurance at 65%, bonuses at 63%, retirement at 55%, and cell phones at 51%. 10% of survey respondents said they do not offer any benefits. So we talk about a workforce crisis. We said we have less, but we have more deaths and maybe less firms. We've had lots of conversations about salaries. You can see the data that's there. Benefits is a big piece of that. And as you can see, there are still percentage percentages that could be improved to give more benefits to staff. Hopefully it would help with retention if you're having a retention issue. We dug a little deeper into a few of the benefits. The first was insurance. Of those that offer health, dental, life, disability insurance, Just under a third of you offer it only to your full-time staff. About a little over 20% offer to all staff, and 8% offer only to owners. And then for those that offer health and dental, little more than a third offer it to the employee's spouse and family, another 18 to employee only, and 8% offer to employee plus spouse. And by comparison, in 2020, of those that offer health, dental, and life disability, 15% said they offered this to all staff. So that's up from in 2025, it's now up 7% or 6%, excuse me. Of those that offer health and dental, 14% had offered only to employees. So that's up to 18%, and only 4% had offered it to employee plus spouse. So that's doubled to 8%. So there's some positive trends there in that benefit being offered. The other benefit we dug into was retirement benefits. Of the 55% of you who say you offer 401ks, about 43% of you don't contribute anything to that plan. Another 21 give 1 to 3%, and you can see the rest there. Each figure on this slide is within 2% of the 2020 results. So again, very consistent in terms of the offering of this retirement benefit over the past 5 years. This year is something new. We asked a few HR related questions. The rationale for asking that is that as more and more funeral directors entering the workforce are first generation, the office dynamic and employer-employee relationship is changing. So we wanted to get a baseline on HR compliance and work-life balance. This is the last category we'll be covering. So first we asked a couple of questions about compliance matters. So do you have an employee handbook? Almost 2/3 said they do not. A majority, 52% of you, do not have any job descriptions created for folks in your funeral home. We asked about work week and scheduling. So the average hours worked weekly, we wanted to know from both a licensed funeral director and resident intern apprentice standpoint. And as you can see, the majority of your licensed funeral directors work 40 to 65 hour work weeks. And the majority of your residents, almost 2/3, work between 25 and 40. And just over half of you actually have a calendar or schedule that you publish for your staff. Lastly, we asked about holidays. Are you off on holidays? Are your staff off on holidays? Again, not surprisingly, most of you, or a small percentage of you, are actually off, or I guess that would mean even closed, but you can see the percentages there. And then again, not surprisingly, almost a little more than actually 2/3 of you are open for services on holidays. So again, just wanted to give some baseline information on HR issues. We have been talking about this in terms of the workforce and retention, and these are going to become more and more important again as we have less generational, multi-generational funeral directors entering funeral service. So that concludes all the data that we wanted to share with you. Here are the email addresses for all of us at the respective states. You can reach out to us if you have any information you would like to, questions you have. Obviously, if there are any questions today, we'd be happy to address them. And before we get to that, I'm just going to pause. I apologize to my colleagues who are on that I didn't really pause long enough probably to give you a chance to add comments. But if there's anything any of my colleagues from the other states would like to add, please feel free to do so before we jump into questions. All right. So Kelly, if there are any questions, we can try to answer them for anybody while we still have a few minutes left.
Okay, great. I'll just remind you, if you have questions, please go ahead and type them in the question box, which is located in the panel on the right-hand side of your computer screen. We have one question. Has the partnership discussed coordinating CE requirements and a CE reciprocity?
Either of you guys anybody else want to jump on that one? You want me to answer that one?
I mean, New Jersey, we've not discussed it as a partnership, but New Jersey allows out-of-state funeral directors to accrue the credits within their own home state, and that is applicable for New Jersey.
Yeah, that's true. We haven't talked about it as a partnership state. My understanding, Kelly, you can actually correct me. I don't think New York, you can sometimes get it approved ahead of time, but for the most part, I guess we could just submit it for approval, but it's not automatically going to be accepted if it's from another state unless we submit it and get approval for a specific topic or session. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Each state has their own requirements for a CEU. New York is fairly difficult, but I've had problems in all of the states to get things approved.
And similar in Massachusetts. Massachusetts will allow other states to submit, and we frequently will coordinate that for another state, particularly a partnership state, to assist them. So we have had many other state programs approved.
And New Jersey applies in all 5 partnership states.
Were there any questions on the survey regarding the use of trade services by funeral homes?
We did not ask that, right? We didn't ask that specific question, I don't believe. I guess that would be
so far,
in relation to the employee and using trade services as opposed to hiring full-time staff. But that's an interesting question. I know we've looked at that in New York to see several times just to see impact of other things and how folks are operating on certain aspects. I know we do have trade service in some of our more populated areas that do play a significant role in terms of removals and for embalmings. But that is not something that we've actually specifically looked at in terms of asking on the survey yet.
And Mike, I think we could share that we did submit the framework for the questions at a partnership meeting. Most of our offices were in attendance. So certainly, if any of our participants have any suggestions for the future surveys, to share them with us, and we'll happily discuss them the next time we're planning a survey.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions that have come in, so I'll just take this moment to thank you, Mike, and all the execs from the partnership states for their work on this and for this presentation. I will direct your attention right now to the number that's on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen in red. Again, just in case you're asked, and this is really for the New York State funeral directors. Please allow us about 7 business days to get your portal updated with your credit from this, and all other state attendees, you will be hearing directly from your state association. I want to thank everyone again, and we do have one more question if you have time.
Sure.
How does the number of funeral homes compare to how many are just licenses that are hanging their shingles at a location?
Yeah, I think, well, I can speak for New York where we're getting that data off of the Department of Health and Bureau of Funeral Directing's website. So if the registration, it could include some of those, so it could be skewing the actual rooftop numbers a little bit. It's registered firms. And I think I noted New Jersey, and I think it was New Jersey and Connecticut, any specific aspects to how they're reporting it. So it probably is not necessarily apples to apples across all 5 states, but it definitely gives you a sense as to whether the numbers are going up or down.
And as Mike suggested, New Jersey was not buildings, it was registrations, but it gives you an idea of the number of legitimate, licensed, registered businesses available to the public.
And I just got a comment from Adam, the Pennsylvania exec, and he said for PA, it includes all licenses that have been renewed, but they can't differentiate between those that are actively working and those are just maintained.
And that would be more towards the funeral director licenses. So we gave both, obviously, we gave your number of funeral directors and number of funeral homes.
Great.
Thank
Well,
you,
that
Mike.
looks like,
Thank you, Mike. Excellent job.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Sure.
thanks everyone for being on today. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us or your own state executive. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon and a great holiday weekend.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly.